Hello, I'm Mark Baer. Welcome to the Joe Cupcake Chronicles. We are in Raw Deal, Part 2. Robert Rauschenberg, the pop artist of the 1960s. And the question that comes to me, if you've ever been in a room full of these paintings, they are ugly. And they are also beautiful. And how can a piece of art be ugly and be beautiful at the same time? It's really quite uncanny. So Joe Cupcake in this episode gets to, mine his inner Rauschenberg a bit. And one of the images that Rauschenberg uses, there's a chicken and there's a hen that keep appearing in many of his works, just plopped right on top of objects that he found in the trash and assembled together and painted. And so Joe Cupcake hunts through his garage, as did Mark Baer, and he found the ugliest thing that he could find, which is this plastic rooster that he had bought in a thrift store to give to his wife as some kind of gag joke. And this thing was pretty hideous. And his wife would throw it out, and he would have to rescue it from the trash. And slowly, Joe Cupcake began to paint this thing and use this thing as his prop. And he endowed this inanimate object with life. This thing is ugly, and yet it became beautiful. And this says something about perception, although I'm not sure what. It's a matter of alchemy. And that is what the artist does. The artist can take one thing and turn it into another thing and make us see. The other thing that Rauschenberg did that appeals to me is he had this visual language of, you'd see Mickey Mantle, you'd see spaceships, you'd see JFK. It was the kind of evocative memory that he used in his collage. In the Joe Cupcake Chronicles, we use images from another time, but are not meant to be nostalgic, but are meant to parallel, in other words, create a parallel world. In other words, we're not looking backwards, we're looking to another time that rhymes with now.
John Cage sat at his piano for 4 minutes and 33 seconds of nothing. The audience was outraged. What was the meaning of this enforced silence? But when they stepped into the New York City night, they heard the sirens and the honking and the street noise, like they were hearing it for the first time. Music suddenly scattered in 1,000 notes. And for a moment, the ordinary was extraordinary. Cage and Robert Rauschenberg were friends and shared the same sensitivities. Discarded junk can be beautiful through a different lens. Rauschenberg found objects in the street and integrated them into his work. But Joe wondered how the artist thought he was going to pay the rent with a goat and a tire and a title like Monogram. Joe was obsessed with the uncanny, how things can be at once familiar and strange. A radial tire, slow-pouring ketchup, the smell of bubblegum, summer evenings in the Parkway, childhood, all stored away in Joe's memory. Illicit cigarettes, kissing a girl under a trampoline. This was Joe's life, Joe's America. He was at a museum in a room full of Rauschenbergs. Joe was struck by how ugly they were, yet so beautiful. How could something ugly be beautiful? What alchemy made such transformation possible? There were Coke bottles and JFK and Mickey Mantle and astronauts and the Statue of Liberty and water towers and car keys and pinup girls, wrist watches, maps, umbrellas, engineering sketches of boxes, and Velazquez's Venus and Cupid. Joe, high on Rauschenberg, searched his garage for the most unattractive object he could find. It didn't take long. It was a plastic rooster. He bought it as a gag gift for his wife, but it was so disturbing that she made him march it straight out to the trash. Joe hid his prize. He'd bring it out every once in a while and move it around the garden, and when he no longer saw it, he knew his wife had found it, and he'd better head to the trash and bail his poor rooster out. Joe was attracted to, yet repulsed by the rooster at the same time. A not unreasonable basis for friendship. There was something poetic about his rooster, the open beak and creased tongue, the hideous chicken feet with a made in China sticker on the bottom, his rolled up jeans with a hole in the back for his tail to poke out. There was the thick belt. What went in the basket? Eggs? A fifth of ancient age in a porn mag? Down home on the farm? But was it art or just creepy? And was Joe creepy for fixating on it? Joe contemplated the bulging eyes, the red wattle, the red comb, the matching red vest with 3 gold buttons that matched the gold belt buckle, the yellow bill, the billy bulge, and he felt for the fella. Who cared until Joe? There, of course, had been a creator somewhere. This started out as a sketch in Winnipeg or Indianapolis to be executed by some wage slave in the Pearl River Delta. What went through his Chinese mind as he applied black paint on those claws, or talons, or whatever they were? Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Silence is not for the unexpressed, but for the self-evident. Or should new words be invented? The flowers burst forth like starry beams, radiant visions disclosed by the sudden burst. Heaven, like enlightenment, is a moment, or maybe they are the same thing. Joe opened his eyes. He looked out at the sea. Big Sur. This land is your land, this land is my land. Blue skies, nothing but blue skies from now on. Daedalus, god of nonsense. Joe stood in the corner, quiet. Salvador Dali was at the easel. It was the night, the clocks melted. Time dripped. Dali was amazed. Joe said, "I see a surrealist spaghetti western, shot from below with the sky above. The heroic pose, whirlwind rifted clouds denoting castration themes. High noon, Gary Cooper, Chef Boyardee." Dali scratched his ear and came up with a gold coin. "Let's go, Joe. America. We'll make mucho lechuga." Dali can't wait for America. He lived and breathed America. He hired the ship's chef to bake a 4-foot loaf of bread and walk down the gangplank using the loaf as a cane. No one noticed. Surrealism had not yet reached New York. No one had eyes trained to see. And then Joe came down the ramp and sputtered to the waiting reporters. Art must be ahead of the curve. The meaning should be on the tip of the tongue, but remain elusive. top with a quarter cup of blue cheese dressing, a quarter cup chopped tomato, and a quarter cup crumbled bacon garnish with a quarter cup chopped green onions, optional. Dolly marveled at Joe's utterance, and together they broke bread, about 2 feet each. As we see, Joe had given much thought to lettuce. The unconscious mind is like an iceberg. But will global warming melt it? And what about iceberg lettuce? The classic wedge again reigned supreme. Yes, if Joe had his say. Over the years, iceberg had been perceived as a lowlier lettuce. The brand suffered and sales slumped. Joe was asked for ideas. His immediate thought was to highlight and promote the wedge salad that he'd recently paid $12 for in a fancy restaurant. This included point-raised blue cheese, diced cucumbers, and tomatoes. Perhaps some diced eggs could be included. In Joe's mind, if the TV audience saw this simple upscale dish, sales would jump. But his partner on this project wasn't impressed. His idea: think beautiful model, tall and naked, except for 3 strategically placed iceberg halves. Joe, always one to fondle the goods in the produce section, knew a better idea when he heard it. His comment: yeah, I'd eat that. Chance contrives better than we ourselves. Joe's friend wrote a story about a chance meeting with an actress in New York. Old Hollywood friends, he was getting out of the cab and she was getting in. An opening that another reader criticizes, too unlikely. But Joe had no such qualms. Things happened to him like that all the time. Joe liked the part best when she peeled off her panties, romantic that he was. They didn't get it, he said to his friend later. Some guys got the girls, some guys didn't. Joe was always lucky. He could walk on water, as long as it was only 3 inches deep. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I shall assume, you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me, as good, belongs to you. Joe's glass was half full, but the water in his glass was cloudy. If Joe could come up with a word for how he was feeling, it would be ambivalent. If he were feeling it, others were too. He could feel the rumble and crackle, hear the loud discharge of collective lightning. He was tapping into the bigger nightmare, the collective unconscious. Joe was trying to keep his head, when all around him others were losing theirs. His wife dreamed about a horse head in the cupboard and horse heads hanging in the living room. His son dreamed about a visit from his mother. She said, "I've got 200 severed heads, and I need to keep them in your apartment." Joe's son was taken aback, naturally. "Are they illegal?" His mother replied, "You better hide them." A few nights later, Joe screamed in his sleep when he saw a face without a face, just teeth and sinew, as if the face had been cut away. In another dream, there was a person with 2 heads, one stuck on top of the other, and he had to look twice to make sure he wasn't suffering double vision. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, or the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. But change was scary. Change was frightening. Change was unstoppable. For Joe, it was all about staying in the bubble. Hi to the wife, hi back, love, love, kiss, kiss. But out the window, change was happening fast. Too fast. Forget the revolution. It was hyper-evolution. Geological time. Forests were shifting into deserts, and back again. Animals were mutating and evolving. Everything was in flux. The beaks of birds were getting larger, getting smaller, getting sharper. Evolution, it was all evolving. The landscape was ever changing. A new digit, a bigger brain, a web foot. Every day a new species appeared, and 10 other species vanished. This moment, only a snapshot, nothing the same, always moving on. There will never be another woolly mammoth. It was a rugged landscape, a dancing landscape, shifting all the time. Endless adaptations was necessary, and Joe wanted to advance, be better, smarter, swifter, grander, one bite at a time, snap, snap. But while he snapped, something bigger behind him was about to. Help! The fast-forward button was stuck, then luck, and everything stopped. He was jolted back to real time. Joe counted his fingers. 10. He counted his toes. 10. All his digits were there. He gave thanks. He checked his other parts. Check, check, and check. Good. He had no basis for complaint. Baby. Needles and pins, poke me, for my sins. Joe thought about the afterlife, the happy hunting ground, the great perhaps, the sweet by and by. Would it be midnight dark and deep? Would it be 40 acres and a mule? Would it be a summer house at the end of the garden? Or would heaven be crowded with everyone who ever lived? Joe imagined a heaven as if painted by Reginald Marsh, an American social realist painter of the 1930s. What interested Marsh were not individuals in a crowd, but the crowd itself. The burlesque stage, the hobos on the Bowery or Coney Island, and Joe thought of tattoo and haircut. Was that what heaven would look like? Crowded, hot, and sweaty, and the best that could be hoped for was a clean towel to every customer. Joe did not expect a personalized heaven with his dog and his watercolors and heirloom tomatoes and football and ESPN and his younger tennis knees. Would eternity be long enough to straighten out his serve? Would Joe's lost relatives know where to find him? How much time did he have to spend with them? Would his old girlfriends get together and compare notes? Would they wear name tags? Would he still have bills? And what if he were in the wrong part of heaven, with hunters and gatherers and cavemen? Was Joe's heaven and their heaven going to be the same? A cave, a fire, a chunk of meat, and a fur? Would he have to take meals with the leaders of the Inquisition? Would the unenlightened from the past die with their prejudices and superstitions intact? What would Joe say to those from the future who couldn't believe his generation let the planet die? Or would anyone care because it would ease the overcrowding? Or maybe heaven was all about the soul, transformed into balls of light, a pure spirit like fireflies, light and joy, endless contentment. But Joe's idea of heaven was a stiff 5-iron onto the green, a 1-putt, and later a stiff Manhattan with a hint of sweet and dry vermouth, and a shake of bitters. So, no, thought Joe. The afterlife was ludicrous, and if he was wrong, he'd find out soon enough. What he expected was like before life. Nothing. So, no. This was it, the main event, the unlikely miracle of a life on earth. This was heaven, and attention must be paid. And now, the immortal Irving Berlin. Heaven, I'm in heaven, about to find the happiness I seek when we're together, dancing cheek to cheek. Impermanence is the only permanent. On Joe's street, a crow on the wire called, caw, 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 and 3 crows on a tree limb answered, caw, 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 and response, caw, caw, caw. The poet bird was crowned. What Joe was looking for was God without God, prayer without expectation. At the 7-Eleven, Joe needed coffee and had little patience for the 30 deluded Joes in front of him buying lottery tickets. They were expecting the wrong miracle. The miracle was the coffee was hot and reasonably good. That's a lot to be thankful for. Another morning, another rocky start. Joe was trying to set his compass, soft-boiled, hard-boiled, sunny side up. He was thinking about God, how some saw God with white hair and a flowing white beard sitting on a throne. But why wouldn't God look like the Pakistani working at the 7-Eleven, or look like his wife for that matter? God, as we know from Scripture, can be tricky. So, next time you pull into a convenience store for a quart of milk or some cigarette papers, think about whom you might be dealing with. And what about Jesus? The popular image of Jesus is a handsome man, blonde, blue-eyed, about 6'2", slight but rugged build, delicate features, an actor, a leading man. And maybe he was handsome, someone the women swooned over and the men wanted to be, kind of imposing physical specimen people would follow. But given where and when he was born, that seems unlikely. At the site considered to be the Mount of Olives, a footprint attributed to Jesus was size 6. So, what if Jesus was 5'1" in his sandals, and of swarthy complexions, throw in some bad teeth, a receding hairline, perhaps a little Billy, like Elvis or Jim Morrison? Would it matter? Love, isn't that enough? And what about the donkey that Jesus rode in on? Did he have some special glow when he got back to the stable? Did he stand out among the animals? Or did he just eat his hay and bray? Shrinks get paid to listen and not look deathly bored. Yawn. Joe was a hard nut to crack, but crack he must. How else would the light shine in? And that is when they made the discovery. Inside of Joe was another Joe and another, like a Russian nesting doll. But when they tried to put the pieces back together, there were Joes left over. The scientists were puzzled. Joe seemed no worse for wear from this experience, and there was some debate. Was he a round peg in a square hole, or a square peg in a round hole? A doctor in white struck Joe's knee with a hammer. Joe's reflexive response. And so, Frank and Dean got pulled over in Las Vegas. The cop asked Dean to walk a straight line. Dean said, "Not unless you put down a net." The doctor smacked Joe's other knee, smartly this time. Joe's eyes crossed, he grinned his stupid grin, and said, "For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong." H.L. Mencken. Joe, in the gray flannel suit, had a nice view from his office on one of the higher floors, but a crack ran down his plaster wall in the shape of a question mark. His unlikely rise through the ranks was the subject of debate, and yet none guessed at the simpler explanation. He pressed the up button on the elevator, drifted off in his usual way, and when he realized his mistake, got off as soon as the door opened. He found an empty desk, settled in, and did what the others did. He faked it. He knew as long as he was not asked to perform surgery or translate Sanskrit, he'd be fine. God only knows Joe knew how it was on the lower floors. Too many rats, not enough cheese, squeak, squeak, squeak. Workers were as fungible as sausage through the meat grinder. Joe could read the signs. Buckle up, stop, go, have a nice day. He not only read the signs, he wrote the signs. The signs were everywhere. The urban landscape dripped with them. They oozed with the zeitgeist. Joe's job was to read the zeitgeist and figure out how to squeeze a buck out of it. He was a prophet for profit. He took the mumbo out of the jumbo and the bongo out of the Congo. Just do it. You're in good hands. We all want a revolution. Toot toot, beep beep. Joe marveled at the lights in Times Square. What if the city was all lit up, but no one was trying to sell anything? Peace, love, tolerance, justice, righteousness, wisdom. "Ah, you crack me up, Joe," said the voice. "But why be a bubble popper? Joe smelled a whiff of something fatuous and knew the minister of sinister was in the house. Today, we say Orwellian. Tomorrow, it could be Cupcakean. Then the minister said, hand washes hand and finger washes finger, and a few greased palms will keep the mad dogs off your ankles. Joe wrote in his notebook, control the message and control perception. Or as Philip Marlowe once said, cool as a slice of chicken in aspic. Joe let it hang there while the minister scratched his head, and then his nuts. Joe had some shots the minister could not hit back, ping and pong, back and forth. The minister liked his boys sharp, the dialectical approach. What are you thinking now, Joe? Don't think, just shout it out. Joe shouted, fast actin' to actin'. Gratitude, the greatest virtue. Thank God for the poets. White gulls against a gray sky. The new moon with the old moon in her arms. The only reason for looking back was to move forward. Joe forgot to take out the trash. His wife called in his cell as she was leaving the house. The one thing you have to do, it's very disappointing. Disappointing, very disappointing, Joe repeated out loud to his dog, who was excited about her morning walk. He talked to his dog a lot. She understood. You didn't forget, said the dog. You never thought of them at all. By solemn vision and bright silver dream, his human once beheld with wondering awe. The days of wonder are upon us. It was Joe's birthday. How strange life was. You could be old at 36 and young again at 53. In his dreams, he lived alternate lives with alternate wives. He was still wrong, of course. The night before, a strange woman fell out of a parked car and someone ran over her. Joe rushed to the scene. She was all right, but they had to search for her hand. It had fallen off. Joe found all the fingers. They were in a twisted bunch sliced off like wet clay. The woman was relieved to have them reattached. She was a waitress and needed them to work. And Joe met other women, and they were all nice to him. Such was his luck some nights. Someone said, she's all blonde, stem to stern, and top to bottom. And Joe, even in his sleep, was thinking, who writes this stuff? Another girl called and insisted he come spend the night. Joe said, sure, with a qualifier, but I'm not ready to go steady. Joe was firing on all cylinders, feeling totally Joe, rare in dreams. There were musicians all arranged by height, and Joe danced, a wild dance, a holy dance, like the dance of David. And later, a willowy girl with eyes like living sapphires spread herself on top of him like Abishag the Shunammite. Legend had it that David did not have sex with her because he already had 18 wives, the maximum amount of wives allowed to a Jewish king. But what did the scribes know? They weren't there. These are old stories, archetypes, the memory jukebox. Abishag read his mind, and she sang, it ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. Oh yeah, pull up to the bumper, baby.